Good day. My name is Danny Eller. I'm going to be presenting on Moonshiners and Bootleggers being a cultural phenomena instead of a way of making a living. In the mountains of North Carolina, where I'm from, Appalachian moonshiners and bootleggers, they've been plying their trade for many generations. It's become a proud heritage of theirs rather than being just a source of income. Moonshining and bootlegging, their traditions going back several generations, as I said before. Uh, and even though this clandestine moonshining business uh, gives a good living for most of them, it's more for to keep up a family tradition and in a way to keep some kind of hold on the past. It's become a part of their a regional culture. Um, and it's part of the independent spirit and family ties from the area. Now, the picture there, that's from a guy by the name of Popcorn Sutton. Popcorn Sutton was lived very close on the Tennessee side of the North Carolina Tennessee border, very close to where I'm from. Um, he was a well-known moonshiner. His white whiskey was very popular in the area, and he was a very big producer. Uh, in 2009, Popcorn Sutton was arrested for the attempted sale of 1,000 gallons to an undercover revenue agent, IRS agent, and he was eventually found guilty, was put on house arrest, and pending his date to start his prison sentence. He eventually, the, just a day or two before his prison sentence, he went in and, to the garage, started his classic car, and committed suicide. Um, Before doing that, he gave his recipe to a person that he had befriended who wanted to start a legitimate liquor production in the area, and he gave that to him. The person who received it, not knowing that he did that in order to keep alive his recipes because he had no surviving family members that were still in the business. Now, in Appalachia, we do have a very large marijuana industry, clandestine growing of marijuana. A lot of those people that were clandestinely brewing moonshine, the younger generation took to growing marijuana. A lot of the same ideas behind the production and growing the items needed to make moonshine translated right over to the illicit marijuana market. Some of them even got into methamphetamines because of the money. It's purely a money thing for that. But the old timers, they really rejected that marijuana and the methamphetamine production. Because they thought that was wrong. To them, uh, that illicit drugs was wrong, and that moonshine was something that went back many hundreds of years, and the production of self brewing, brewing of even George Washington brewed whiskey and had a distillery eventually set up in his plantation at Mount Vernon. So this is a long tradition, and whether the government thought it was illegal or thought it was legal or wanted to tax it or not, it didn't matter to them. That was part of their tradition and how their family made money and how they carried on a family heritage. Um, Now it didn't pay a lot of money. I mean, some of the people did well, but especially for the area, but none of them became like these big drug dealers with mansions in Miami and things like that. It was more that they were able to provide for their family pretty well and and do what they needed to do without really causing a lot of attention to themselves. It's become, whether or not that's good or bad to them, it's a culture, and whether it's good or bad, it's going to remain part of their culture for some time. Um, the marijuana and the methamphetamine production, that's still a big problem in the area, but the old time moonshiners and their immediate family members are really staying away from that. As I discussed in my previous slide, um, about the marijuana, it listed marijuana production and methamphetamines. The biggest threat to the moonshine industry, it isn't law enforcement. It is that encroaching drugs, marijuana and methamphetamines in the area, and it's the erosion of the local culture and erosion of the morals of the young in the area that will make that industry grow. Now, the traditional uh, people, they are very much against that, and they don't see themselves as amoral. They are doing something that's always been doing, just as I discussed in my previous slide. Um, this will continue in the area. Moonshining will continue in the area, even though it will eventually erode a great deal. But it's a very strong tradition, and it's lasted a couple hundred years throughout the area. So it will continue for quite some time. Now, a lot of people who think of culture of that area, they're thinking country music, they think something along those lines. Uh, but really, one thing that has spawned out of the moonshine and bootlegging industry, and before I go into that, let me explain the difference. Moonshiners are the ones that produce the illicit liquor. They are the producers. Bootleggers are the ones that transport not only the illicit production of liquor, but they also transport legal liquor from an area that's legally sold to another area where it cannot be legally sold. Now that was a big deal in the 1940s and 1950s, even post uh, uh, prohibition, because prohibition was not, it was a federal law. I mean, it no longer was a federal law prohibition against liquor or alcohol, but there was still, for many, many decades after 1933, when prohibition, the federal prohibition went away, for many decades after that, there were still states, some states, and even down to county level, that outlawed the possession and sale and possession of alcohol. So my family was quite involved in that, as they would buy liquor from the off the beach, as boats would be run up onto the beach from overseas. I mean, from larger ships just outside the international or the territorial waters of the United States. Put them on smaller boats. They'd run up on the beach. My grandfather would have some guys there load up the car, and then they would travel to the mountains of North Carolina for resale of this whiskey. Then later on, after Prohibition was in North Carolina, was lifted in North Carolina, the counties in the western part of the state were still dry, and making alcohol possession and sale illegal. So he would, uh, buy that in other locations were illegal, then transport it to the mountains for resale. Um, that in doing so, these bootleggers would put together special types of vehicles. One of the vehicles was the most popular was the 1940 Ford Coupe. Another one was similar years, 1940s Chevrolets with the V8s, and they would enhance these vehicles' horsepower. They would modify the rear suspension so that they would sit level, and they even figured out a way of getting the car to sit level, loaded or unloaded, that it would it wouldn't drop down. It would still have suspension because it had to handle in the mountains, but it would still stay level even though it had several hundred pounds of liquor. And then they would run the mountains at night, transporting the the uh, the bootleg whiskey or the moonshine to its markets in the dead of night. Um, Out of that, they started, especially in the North Wilkesboro area of North Carolina. They started to race each other on weekends, their liquor cars, and they do it on dirt tracks. It became very popular. They started selling tickets, and eventually it turned into what we have today is NASCAR. There you see in North Wilkesboro one of the dirt tracks, and they were running the night. Most of them there are the 1940 Ford coupes. My uncle bought one in California, and I got to ride in it. Um, it was a 1940 Ford Coupe, and he bought it to reminisce about his days of being a blocker for my grandfather. And that's what they would do. They would have one or more blocking cars that would protect the load car. And if the load car was a law enforcement trying to pull over the load car, the blocking cars would block the law enforcement until they could be able to get away, and then they would try to outrun the police because their vehicles were still hopped up, but were not loaded. One of the most famous of this came from Wilkesboro, and he was a champion NASCAR driver. He started he started driving when he was a teenager. Started driving liquor cars for the Bootleggers. His father spent a third of his life in prison for moonshining, and then he took up the bootlegging part, and that's where he learned to drive, and then started the competition. All this when he was just a teenager, and became one of the true greats, and even owned some NASCAR teams. Eventually owning some NASCAR teams. His name was Junior Johnson. Now, my grandfather knew Junior Johnson. He knew him. He was very popular, but my grandfather was in the same business and knew him about the same time period as Junior Johnson was. Um, and as I stated, Junior Johnson's father was a major moonshiner in the area, in the Wilkesboro area, and he spent like a third of his life. There was one story about Junior Johnson being only 4 years old, and the revenuers found several thousand gallons of moonshine stored in the house, and that Junior Johnson, remember, they put planks out of the second floor window to slide the boxes of moonshine out of the house. Um, Junior Johnson himself was reportedly never caught by law enforcement over his many years of bootlegging. However, I'll go into that a little bit more in the next slide. In James Joyce's book Moonshine, A Cultural History of America's Infamous Liquor, it states in there, but moonshine has resonance. Some consumers respond to the word positively, associating it with American history and tradition, with danger and excitement, or as in Spolman's case, home. Um, and as going back to Junior Johnson, that was part of his culture. That's where he grew up. That's what his father did. That's what his grandfather did. He just kind of took on another aspect of that, being a primary mover of the moonshine. Therefore, he was mostly a bootlegger, although he did partake in moonshining. And eventually, he was approached by one of the people that he met in NASCAR, a marketer in NASCAR, who wanted to take his Junior Johnson's father's recipes and set up a distillery, legal distillery, and start producing it for commercial sales, which eventually he did. However, that has gone on quite a bit, and most of the moonshiners don't want anything to do with it because they have family members going to carry it on, and they don't want to commercialize it because it's against what they're about. It takes away part of their identity of being independent. Now, I said before in the previous slide that Junior Johnson was never caught. That doesn't mean he was never arrested. He was arrested, but never behind the wheel of a liquor car. They never caught him while he was bootlegging, but they did catch him moonshining. And in 1956, he was spent a year in jail, and we know this because there's a mugshot on the Piedmont Distillery webpage. There's a mugshot there of Junior Johnson from 1956, and the NASCAR marketing person who set this up and talked Junior Johnson into having his father's recipes commercially produced. So they're making big hay out of it for his Midnight Moon Moonshine brand. Now, in James Joyce's book, he explains about the moonshine culture compared to the drug trade of marijuana. And he wrote that this is a quote from his book. It was easy to understand. Marijuana simply didn't fit into traditional mountain culture. Making moonshine was a folk art. Growing marijuana was not. In conclusion, the clandestine moonshine industry in Appalachian Mountains survives. It will continue on for many generations to come. This is not about them making money, although some do make a fairly decent living out of it, but they're not buying mansions. They support their business. They make enough to support their business, to support their families, but most of these people, and I know that several of them, live very modestly. They really want to keep a low profile because when they start spending a lot of money, when they start living a lot better than the traditional people around them, it brings attention to them, and they are more interested in maintaining the tradition than they are in making a lot of money. Now, this is what it binds. That is a symptom of it, or a example of it binding these generations together. Now, as stated before, the bootleggers and moonshiners' biggest threat is not law enforcement. It's the erosion of their culture. It's the encroachment of marijuana and methamphetamines on their young, and in addition, it is the legal production of their recipes that is most likely to erode this down to where it's no longer a regional cultural phenomenon. Uh, and that concludes my brief. Have a good afternoon or night.